Hi, I'm Chef Jennifer Cabillos, and today I'm going to be making a chocolate pound cake. So we're going to be doing that using the creaming method, which is a method we use with fat-based cakes that have solid fats in them, such as butter or shortening. We cream that fat with sugar for aeration and eggs, and then we use chemical leaveners with that. It's in the fat-based cake family, which means that it does have a higher ratio of fat and sugar, which cause that tenderness as opposed to a sponge cake. But we're going to be doing a variation on that today that's a little bit different than the typical creaming method. So let's get started. Okay, so we're going to get started with our creaming method, and creaming method always starts with a solid fat and sugar. So I have my solid fat here, which is going to be butter. You can see that it's softened. This is really the softening that you want. There shouldn't be any liquid in there. I'll hold it a little better. It should hold its shape completely, but be soft and smooth all the way through. You can achieve this by either leaving that out at room temperature, as long as your room is between 65 and 75 degrees, for about an hour or so. Or if you're trying to rush things along, you can pulse it in the microwave just to really get it nice and softened. But you want to use really small increments and be moving it around so that you don't melt holes through it, because we really don't want a melted fat. We're relying on this fat to give us a little bit of aeration. The sugar we add to this is really, as it whips, going to create air bubbles in our fat. And you'll be able to tell that that's happening because the fat will get much lighter. Right now it's very yellow. It's going to start to turn white and look just a little bit fluffy. So I'm going to raise this up. And I'm going to add my sugar as I'm mixing. Now, if you don't feel like your butter is completely softened all the way through, you might want to cream this just until it's completely smooth. But mine's already smooth, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So while it's mixing, I'm just going to add my sugar right along the edge. With most fat-based cakes, I've put quite a bit of sugar in here, which is what keeps our cake really nice and tender. You can see it mixing up in here, and the color is lightening, and it's completely mixing in with sugar. Now, when we're mixing cakes, we really have two goals. One is to create one completely homogeneous mixture, which means no chunks of fat, no clumps of sugar, no clumps of flour. All the ingredients are completely mixed together, which is allowing me to have one cake with one texture and not with weird stripes or places where fat has melted out. So I need to make sure at each step that's getting mixed all the way in. If you're using a mixer like this KitchenAid, you want to make sure you're using your rubber spatula to scrape all the way down to the little dimple in the bottom of the bowl, all the way around. And I do this every single addition, every time I add an ingredient. If you have clumps of butter or other things stuck down around that bowl, then when you dump them into your pan, you're going to have chunks inside your cake, which is not what you want. So now you can see that I have my cake and butter mixed together. It hasn't taken very long. It's looking just a little bit fluffy. I don't need to go overboard on this. A lot of people are mixing, like whipping this at high speeds for a long amount of time. I find that that level of aeration can be a little too much. We just want to get it mixed together and starting to look a little bit lighter. It should be one smooth consistency. So now that I've done that, I can start to add my eggs. So one thing, if we want to have a homogeneous mixture, we have to move slowly from one consistency to another consistency. That means I'm not dumping in large amounts of flour or liquid. I'm always slowly adding them in. So I'm going to add one egg at a time until it's completely mixed in. So I'm going to go to a medium speed. Once I stop seeing that liquid hanging out in the bottom of my bowl, I can add the next egg. So when you stop seeing those streaks of yolks, then we can keep going. All right. So now I have all my egg in there, and I'm going to scrape down my bowl again. So when I start to scrape this down, you'll see that there were kind of chunks of thicker butter that are stuck to the outside and all around the bottom. So it's really important that we get those off so that we can have that consistent batter that we're looking for. You're going to hear me say that a lot. So now that that's mixed in, we just want to make sure that this is completely mixed before we move on. Alright, so this is looking nice and smooth. So that means we're ready to go to the next step. Now here's where what I do varies from most blending methods. Traditional blending methods will have you combine all your liquid ingredients, combine all your dry ingredients, and then alternate adding those ingredients in. I find it much easier to add all of my dry ingredients at the beginning and get that batter really thick so it can press out any clumps, and then add all of my liquid ingredients slowly. Now the reason most blending methods or most creaming methods don't do that is because you can overmix this and create a very tough texture by developing gluten. Gluten is a protein that is in all wheat-based flours and some other grains, and when you mix it, it starts to create a web in there that creates that kind of chewy texture, and the more you mix it, the more of that texture you're going to see. What you have to do is be really careful about the amount of time we're spending mixing. We only want to mix until the ingredients combined, and then we're done, and you shouldn't see any problems. So here I have some AP flour, which I'm going to sift all these ingredients together. I use AP flour here because this particular pound cake has a fairly high ratio of liquid. Now, if I wanted to use cake flour for this and get a slightly fluffier product like a traditional yellow cake, I could use cake flour, but I want a more dense cake, especially if I'm making something that I want to turn into a wedding cake and be really nice and structurally sound. And I really want all that rich flavor that's going to come from my sour cream and buttermilk, and the ability to add that in and still get that structure comes from the protein, the higher protein amount that's in all-purpose flour than in cake flour. So now I have my cocoa powder, my salt, my baking powder, and my baking soda. You especially want to make sure that you sift cocoa powder because it's a lot more prone to clumping. I do want to say that if you're making a vanilla cake into a chocolate cake or vice versa, you really don't want to substitute flour for cocoa powder 1-to-1. Cocoa powder is a much stronger desiccant, so you'll usually end up with a drier cake if you do that. So I do have completely different recipes, similar but different recipes for my chocolate pound cake and my vanilla pound cake. So you can see that that's all together. I like to sift it onto one of these parchment papers because I can use this to really easily add it in to my mixer by just folding it up like a little taco like this. Instead of trying to scoop it out of a larger bowl, I can just kind of slide it in like this. And it makes for a lot less mess, and I can reuse this parchment paper afterwards because all that dry is going to come off. Now when we start out, you want to make sure you start at a really low mixer speed so that this doesn't explode back out. And we're only going to mix this just until it comes together and we don't see any dry clumps. So you can see it's starting to absorb that liquid from our eggs and butter and become a thicker batter now. So now that we see that this is most of the way combined, if you look down in the bottom, you'll see that there's still uncombined butter and eggs down there, and I have dry amounts sticking to the sides. So once again, scraping down the sides all the way to the bottom, and that really didn't take very long. I don't need to be beating this for 4 or 5 minutes. I really need like a good 60 seconds, and that's about it. Alright, so I've scraped that all together. And I'm just going to continue mixing this just until that looks smooth, which is only going to be about 10 to 15 seconds. All right. So now that I have all of this in here, you can see that it looks nice and smooth and beautiful. It does not look chunky or clumpy. I don't see any large bits of flour in here, which is exactly what we want to look for. Now I have my buttermilk and sour cream and vanilla already combined. You can weigh them separately. I like to try and weigh things that go together because I'm all about reducing the amount of dishes that I have to make. So I'm just going to slowly add this in while I'm mixing. I can dump it all in, but it's going to mix together a lot better if I add it in slowly. Now I'm going to use my rubber spatula to scrape this clean, because I really want to make sure that I'm getting all of my ingredients in my cake so that I have enough batter and so that I have the proper amount of moisture and fat in my cake. Once again, I don't want to mix this for a super long amount of time. So I just wanted to mix it until it was combined. And for the last time, I'm going to scrape down those edges to make sure that it's all one consistency. All right. So that was really quick and easy, and our batter is pretty much done now. So that's very simple. We're going to get it put into our pan. Okay, so I have my oven preheated to 350 if you have a conventional oven, and you want to do around 335 if you have a convection oven. Now, the reason for that is that if you have really, really high heat from that circulation, the outside's going to bake more quickly, and that's going to mean that your cake has a really high dome in the center and really low sides. By evening out that heat, by lowering it down just a little bit for an oven with better circulation, you're going to get a more even and level cake. I'm going to prepare my pan. I have an 8-inch parchment that I've cut just to fit on the inside. I'm going to put a little bit of pan spray in the bottom. This is going to help this stick to the bottom so I don't get air bubbles under or cake batter underneath my paper. And then I'm just going to gently spray the sides and bottom of the paper to make sure that it releases properly. Then I never have to worry about my cake not coming out. So this batter is much thicker than what you would see with a blending method cake, which is a fat-based cake with liquid fat. This is a fat-based cake with solid fat. So you can see it's not going to pool out on its own. I'm going to use my small offset spatula to really get that even so that my cake turns out nice and even. Just smoothing that all the way around. And you really want this pan to be about 2/3 to 3/4 of the way full, or it's not going to fill up entirely. I've kind of mentioned this in previous videos, but when I'm baking cakes professionally, I really like to bake individual layers so that they're really consistent, and it's a lot easier to do multiple cakes at a time. And they bake a lot quicker, but for this purpose, I want to show you guys torting, which is cutting cakes in even layers. So I'm going to bake one full 2-inch layer. So this is mostly full pan, and it's going to fill this pan up all the way. So now I'm going to tap this just a little bit to get any air bubbles that might be down around the bottom out, so that I get a really consistent cake. And then I'm ready to go into the oven. And spinning it like this just helps to really level that top. So now we're ready to bake. So I've removed the cake from the oven and I have trimmed it level with the top of the cake pan so that you can see the interior crumb. So you can see that it's still nice and moist and rich. It kind of bounces back whenever I poke it. And it's really nice and even all the way across the top. So this is going to be slightly less moist than a blending method cake because it has such a high ratio of liquid. This has a little bit less liquid, but it's going to be more moist than any of our sponge cakes, which really rely on those eggs for leavening and moisture. You can also tell that it's done because you can see the large gaps around the edges where it has pulled away from the sides of the pan. So we're still going to take our offset spatula, making sure I'm pushing all the way to the edge and not gouging into the cake. So pushing all the way out, I'm going to slide this all the way around just to make sure it's completely released. I should be able to invert this completely and it should slide right out. So I'm just going to turn that back over. I'm going to allow it to cool like this until it is completely room temperature, and then I'm going to wrap it completely in plastic and store it in the refrigerator. I usually like to let these sit refrigerated overnight, or at least for a couple hours till it's chilled all the way through before torting and filling and icing. That way it's completely cool. It's not going to melt any of my other items. But you can see that it's nice and thick. It's got a really even bake. It's got a nice good color all the way around. And overall we have really great moist chocolate cake here. Okay, so now our rich, moist chocolate pound cake is done. We're going to wrap that up and refrigerate it overnight, set it to the side, and in another video I will be turning that into a traditional Black Forest torte. So keep your eyes open for that. I'm also going to do a video where I kind of demo and show the difference between those different fat-based cakes and foam-based cakes, and then the different methods, specifically the blending method, the creaming method, which you guys have already seen, and then a couple of sponge cake methods. So you can really see the difference between the texture of them and the different purposes that we use them for. The reason why we have different mixing methods and kind of the science behind that. So that you can select the right cake for whatever it is that you're making. So I hope that you enjoyed the video, and make sure that you check out the other videos that will come later. Thank you.